Hello, friends. I'm back with another fantastic story from Sci-Fi Traveler. In this story, we'll be listening to the story of Elena and William. Fill up your coffee cup and settle into your chair. The story is about to begin. The thing about being invisible, William had decided somewhere around the third course, was that it gave a man tremendous freedom to people watch. Nobody minds being stared at by furniture, and that was more or less what he had become to the thousand gleaming guests of Halcyon, a chair that happened to breathe. He sat at the very end of the long table, where the floating chandeliers thinned out and the light went a little tired. A serving drone drifted past with a tray of something that glowed faintly violet and smelled like cinnamon, arguing with the sea. It paused at his neighbor, the tall Varan ambassador, whose skin shifted color when he laughed, then sailed straight over William's plate as though his place setting were a small, polite hole in the universe. "Don't worry about me," William murmured to the drone. "I ate before I came. I always eat before I come. I have eaten before every banquet for 2 years now. I'm basically a man who shows up to dinner already full, out of spite." The drone did not answer. Drones, in his experience, were excellent listeners precisely because they did not. He had stopped expecting otherwise. That was the part nobody told you about loneliness, that it eventually got comfortable, like a bad chair you'd owned so long your spine had agreed to its shape. The conversations curved around him. Laughter rose and fell down the length of the hall, a tide that never quite reached his shore. Above them all, the high table burned bright with dignitaries, and at its center sat the queen. Elena. He looked at her the way you look at weather. She was lit from within somehow, her skin a soft, radiant white beneath the chandeliers, and her ears came to those delicate points that the histories made such a fuss about. Around her the suitors performed. A Drathi lord recited something with his 4 hands. A prince from the inner rings laughed too loudly at his own wit. She received all of it with the patient, gracious stillness of a woman watching a parade she had not asked for. Nothing to do with him. He turned back to his empty plate in the philosophical question of whether he could steal a role without anyone noticing, which was, frankly, the only advantage of being unseen. Then the hall went quiet. Not all at once. It traveled, a hush moving down the tables like a drop temperature. William looked up. The queen had risen. She said something to the Drathi lord. He sat, bewildered. She said something to the prince and turned her shoulder, and the gesture was so final it might as well have been a closing door. One by one she dismissed them, quiet word by quiet word, and then she stepped down from the high table, and she began to walk. The entire court watched. 1,000 luminous faces turned to track her, and William turned too, because that's what you do, and he was deeply curious which lucky fool she was, crossing the whole length of the hall to honor. He scanned the seats behind him, empty. The wall behind him, also a wall. She kept coming. The cinnamon sea drone got out of her way. Her footsteps were the only sound in a room built for 1,000 voices, and somewhere in his chest, William's heart began doing something arrhythmic and frankly unprofessional. She stopped at the empty chair beside him. She sat. No announcement, no explanation. She simply settled into the seat as if it had been waiting for her all evening, arranged the folds of her gown, and looked out at the stunned hall with the mild interest of someone admiring a view. William's mouth had gone completely dry. 2 years of being a chair, and now this. Somewhere a fork clattered onto a plate, and nobody apologized for it. He stopped, started over. "You're in my section." The queen turned to look at him properly for the first time. Up close, her eyes were a startling pale gold, and there was something in them that was not pity and not politics. Something quieter and far more dangerous to a man's composure. "Is it your section?" she said. "No one else seemed to want it." That's sort of the running theme of my whole posting, actually." He gestured weakly at his bare plate. "They don't even feed me. I'm what's known in the diplomatic corps as a centerpiece." The corner of her mouth moved, just barely. "Then," Elena said, reaching over to take a roll from his neighbor's untouched basket and set it gently on William's plate, "we should fix that first." And in the enormous, scandalized silence of the banquet, The space between their two chairs became the most charged thing in the room. William looked at the roll on his plate as though it might be a diplomatic trap. It was, he was fairly sure, the first piece of food that had landed in front of him at any function aboard Halcyon in 2 years, and now it had been placed there by the most powerful woman in 3 star systems, in front of 1,000 witnesses who had collectively forgotten how to breathe. "I should warn you," he said, "that if I eat this, the Varen ambassador might declare war." It was technically his. "He has 4 others," said Elena. "He won't notice. Varens count by the handful, and he only has so many handfuls." William laughed, a startled, undignified bark of a laugh that escaped before he could stop it and went skidding out into the silent hall. Several hundred faces flinched. He clamped his mouth shut. "Sorry, I haven't done that in a while. The laughing, it's a muscle. It's gone soft." "You should exercise it," she said, watching him with that quiet golden attention. "It suits you better than the other thing." "What other thing?" "The thing you do at the end of the table. The one where you talk to the drones." He felt his ears go hot. Okay. How long have you been watching the man nobody watches?" She considered this. She had a way of considering things that made you feel the question was being weighed on an actual scale somewhere. 3 banquets, she said. Possibly 4. There was one where you tried to leave early and the door wouldn't open for you because your clearance had expired, and you stood there pretending to admire the architecture for 11 minutes until someone let you out. "That was a deeply private humiliation," William said, "and I'll thank you to never mention it again." It was the most honest thing anyone did all evening. He didn't have a reply for that, which was becoming a theme. Around them the hall had begun, very cautiously, to remember itself. A murmur here, the clink of a glass there, the social machinery grinding back to life now that it was clear the Queen was not going to stand up and explain herself. She wasn't going to. He could see that. She'd sat down beside him the way other people sat down to dinner, as if it were the most ordinary thing in the cosmos, and she intended to make the rest of them live with it. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "You're going to anyway. I can see it building. You get a small line here." She touched the air near her own brow. "Right before." "Do I?" He scrubbed at the spot self-consciously. "Fine, why? And don't say the role. We both know this isn't about bread distribution." She was quiet for a moment. Above them, the chandeliers drifted on their gravity tethers, slow as jellyfish, scattering soft light across the table. Beyond the great curved window behind the high table, the planet they orbited turned its blue shoulder toward them, indifferent and enormous. "Everyone in this room," Elena said at last, "has spent the evening trying to be seen by me. The Lord with the 4 hands rehearsed his poem for a month. I have it on good authority he made his attendants stand in for me while he practiced. The prince from the inner rings has changed his cologne 3 times since the appetizers, because each time he leaned in, I leaned back." A faint smile. "They perform at me until I stop being a person and become a prize. And it is exhausting, William, being a prize. A prize doesn't get to be tired. A prize doesn't get to make a joke about bread. You know my name. Of course I know your name. You're the only one who never once tried to make me learn it. That's how I learned it." He turned this over slowly, the way he'd turned over the roll. Outside, a maintenance skiff drifted past the window, tiny against the planet, its little lights blinking, somebody's whole evening happening out there in the cold, while in here the warmest thing in the room had just sat down next to the coldest seat. "For the record," he said quietly, "I wasn't being noble. I didn't perform at you because it never occurred to me that I had a chance. You don't try to win a son." Elena went very still. Something crossed her face. Not the practiced stillness of the high table, but something younger and more uncertain, there and gone. "That," she said, "is the difference between you and the Lord with 4 hands. He thinks I'm a son he can catch." She picked up her own glass and tilted it just slightly toward him. The smallest toast in the history of toasts, meant for no eyes but his. "You're the only one who looked up and just thought it was warm." They drank, the 2 of them, to nothing and everything, while the banquet pretended not to watch. A drone finally, drifted up and deposited an actual plate of food in front of William, having apparently received some quiet instruction. and he stared down at it like a man witnessing a minor miracle. "It's real," he said. "It has texture. I'd forgotten food had texture." "What did they used to give you?" "Nothing. That was the whole menu, a generous helping of nothing, followed by a palate-cleansing course of also nothing." He poked the food experimentally with a utensil he wasn't sure how to use. It had too many tines and seemed faintly disappointed in him. "How does a human end up here, you're wondering? You've got the line. Right between your eyebrows. There it is." "I don't have a line." "You absolutely have a line. We've established this. It's a whole feature now." She let it go, which he was learning was her version of conceding, so he told her. Not the polished version. He didn't have a polished version, having never been asked. He'd been a junior attaché on the first human delegation, the most expendable man on a ship full of expendable men, sent up to Halcyon because somebody had to be, and he had no family who'd make a fuss if the shuttle came apart on the way. The delegation soured. Treaties were signed and then quietly strangled. One by one, his colleagues were recalled home until the budget thinned to a single line item, and the single line item was him, a human presence, technically maintained, a flag nobody saluted. "They forgot to recall me," he said. "I'm fairly sure of it. There's a form somewhere with my name on it, in a drawer, on a planet, and one day someone will open that drawer and say, 'Good Lord, is he still up there?' And you stayed. Where would I go? The shuttle's gone. The delegation's gone. I'm a centerpiece, remember? Centerpieces don't get a return trip." He said it lightly, the way he said everything heavy, but something in her stillness told him she'd heard the part underneath the joke. She had a talent for that. It was unnerving in a queen and devastating in a woman. "You think being forgotten up here is a tragedy," Elena said. "Try being remembered, every hour of every day, by everyone. You cannot imagine how loud it is to be looked at by 1,000 people at once. There is no version of me they will let exist that isn't for them. I have advisors who tell me how to stand. I have a protocol officer whose entire job is to prevent me from saying anything true." She turned the stem of her glass slowly between her fingers. "When I was young, my mother told me a crown is just a very heavy way of being alone. I thought she was being poetic. She was being literal. She usually was." "So we're both stranded," William said. "You at the top of the room, me at the bottom. Same shipwreck, different ends of the lifeboat. The difference," she said, "is that no one will let me drown quietly. There will be a ceremony. There will be music." He laughed again, easier this time, the muscle remembering its work. And then, because he was a man with a constitutional inability to leave a tender moment undisturbed, he gestured at the great curved window, at the blue planet turning below them, at the whole impossible architecture of the orbital citadel humming around them. "You know what's mad?" he said. "We're sitting in a building that floats in the sky. There are people out there breathing vacuum for a living. We cross the dark between stars to all eat dinner in the same room. And the most astonishing thing that's happened tonight, the genuinely unprecedented event, is that a woman sat next to a man on purpose." He shook his head. 1,000 years of science. We bent space, and the court's about to faint over a seating chart." Elena looked out at the planet with him, and for a moment the gold went soft in her eyes. "That's the secret nobody tells you about progress," she said. "We learn to move stars. We never learn to move a single chair." She glanced sideways at him, and the smile that came was small and real and entirely off protocol. The kind her officer would have a heart attack over. "Until tonight. Until tonight," he agreed. And the space between their chairs, which had started the evening as the loneliest gap in the citadel, had become, without either of them moving an inch, very nearly nothing at all. It couldn't last, of course. Tender things never got to in rooms like this. William felt the change before he saw it, the particular quality of a silence that has teeth in it. And then a man was standing at their end of the table, casting a long shadow across the miracle plate of food. The prince from the inner rings. The cologne had been reapplied. William could smell ambition and bergamot in roughly equal measure. "Your radiance," the prince said, bowing to Elena with a precision so exact it was nearly an insult. "Forgive the intrusion. The court grows curious." There is a certain conversation beginning to move through the hall, and I thought it kinder you should hear it from a friend than feel it from 1,000 strangers. He did not look at William. He looked through him with the practiced ease of someone who had been ignoring the human for 2 years and saw no reason to stop now. People are asking what it means. The Unity banquet was convened to bind 9 worlds. They are wondering whether their queen has chosen, tonight, to bind herself instead. And to whom? Let them wonder, said Elena. They will do more than wonder, Radiance. The Jarathi delegation has already withdrawn to confer. The Varan ambassador is composing a message home as we speak, with all 4 hands, I am told, which he reserves for matters of grave consequence. The prince allowed himself the thinnest smile. 9 fragile alliances sat down to dinner tonight. A gesture from you is not a gesture. It is a treaty, or the breaking of one. And the entire room can see precisely where you have placed yourself. There it was, laid out clean on the table between them, colder than any plate William had ever been served. He understood, suddenly and completely, the size of what she'd done by crossing the room. He'd been so busy being astonished that a woman had sat beside him that he'd missed the part where a queen had spent something to do it. Something that didn't come back. He's right, William heard himself say. Both of them turned to look at him. The prince blinked, visibly startled that the centerpiece had opinions. He's a snake, William went on. And I'd bet my entire plate of food he's enjoying this more than is strictly legal. But he's right about the arithmetic. He kept his eyes on Elena. You didn't tell me what it cost to walk over here. You let me think it was just a chair. It was just a chair, she said. It was 9 world, said the prince. It was a chair, she repeated, but quieter. And William heard the strain in it now, the thing the protocol officer was paid to prevent. He set down the strange, many-tined fork. His heart was doing the arrhythmic thing again, but underneath it ran something steadier and worse. The decency that had kept him alive and alone for 2 years, and would, he suspected, cost him the only good thing that had happened to him in all that time. Elena. First name. He'd never said it aloud. It felt enormous in his mouth, like something he wasn't cleared to handle. You don't owe me this. You really don't. You came down here, and you gave me a roll and a laugh, and the first real conversation I've had since the shuttle left, and that's already more than I'd worked out how to hope for. I'll remember it for the rest of my forgotten little life. He attempted a smile. It came out crooked. So go back up. Sit at your table. Save your 9 worlds. I'm an excellent secret. I've had 2 years of practice at being one. Nobody will even have to pretend I'm not here, because they already don't think I am. The prince's smile widened, scenting victory. That's very generous of you, the prince said. It wasn't for you, said William, without looking at him. For a long moment, Elena said nothing. The whole hall seemed to lean in, 1,000 luminous faces waiting to learn whether the strange interlude was over, whether the universe would tidy itself back into its proper shape. Queen above, human below, the gap between the chairs restored to its rightful emptiness. She reached out and picked the fork back up. Then she set it down on his plate again, deliberately in front of him, exactly as she had set the roll an hour and a lifetime ago. Finish your dinner, she said. You haven't eaten in 2 years. The arithmetic can wait that long. The prince did not leave so much as evaporate, the way ambitious men do when a thing they cannot bend refuses to break for them. He gave one last bow, shallower than the first, and retreated into the murmuring dark of the hall to tell the 9 worlds whatever the 9 worlds were going to hear. William watched him go and felt the old invisibility try to settle back over his shoulders like a familiar coat. He shrugged it off. It was getting harder to wear, now that someone had seen him out of it. You shouldn't have done that, he said. I gave you a clean exit. I rehearsed it and everything. It was a good speech. The crooked smile was a nice touch, I thought. It was a terrible speech, said Elena. You called your own life forgotten and little in the same sentence. No one who talks about himself that way has finished deciding to live. He stopped. That's a horrifyingly accurate thing to say to a man over dinner. I'm a queen. We're trained to find the soft place and press. She picked up her glass again. I'm choosing not to, with you. You should notice that. It's rarer than the role. He noticed. He noticed a great many things now that he'd started. The way the chandeliers had drifted lower over the evening as the gravity tethers relaxed, the way the planet had turned nearly half its face to them, the way her hand rested on the table, not quite touching his, but no longer arranging itself to be looked at. A hand at rest. He suspected it didn't get to be at rest very often. "Tell me about the arithmetic," he said. "The real version, not the prince's version, where everything's a catastrophe scented with bergamot. What actually happens to you if you stay down here?" She was quiet, weighing it on that internal scale. "The Drathi will read it as favoritism toward the human delegation and demand concessions. The Varens will read it as instability and hedge their grain shipments. My own council will read it as a young queen behaving like a young woman, which to them is the gravest charge available." A pause. "And somewhere a protocol officer is having the worst night of a long and decorated career." "Survivable, then. Annoying, but survivable." "Survivable," she agreed. "The crown survives most things. That's rather the problem with it. It survives loneliness beautifully. It's never once died of it." There it was again. The thing under the joke. Hers this time instead of his. They were, he thought, two people who had learned the exact same trick in two different corners of the galaxy. How to wrap the unbearable thing in something light enough to carry. He recognized the technique because it was his own. It was a strange and specific intimacy, meeting another fluent speaker of a language you'd assumed you'd invented alone. "Can I tell you my actual fear?" he said. "Not the noble version." "Please, the noble version was exhausting. I'm afraid that tomorrow you wake up, the gravity tethers reset, the music starts, the 9 worlds line up to be governed, and I become a story you have to manage. A complication. The night the queen sat with the human, regrettable. Let's not repeat it." He turned the fork over. "I've been a flag nobody saluted for 2 years. I think I'd rather stay a flag than become a mistake. A mistake is worse. A mistake, people remember." Elena set down her glass, and then, in full view of 1,000 watching faces, of the withdrawn Drathi and the 4-handed Varen, and the bergamot prince and the apoplectic protocol officer, she moved her hand the last small distance and laid it over his. The hall made a sound. Not a gasp exactly. Something quieter and more total. The sound of a great many beings deciding simultaneously to remember this for the rest of their lives. "Listen to me," she said. "I have spent my entire reign being the most carefully chosen thing in every room. Every word, every alliance, every gown. Chosen for me, by committees, for reasons. Do you understand? I have never once gotten to be the one doing the choosing, until I stood up at that table and walked the length of this hall toward the only person in it who wanted nothing from me." Her fingers tightened. "You are not a mistake, William. You are the first decision I have ever made entirely on my own, and I find I would like to make a few more of them, if the 9 worlds can manage to survive a woman with a chair and a mind." "That," he said when he could speak, "was a much better speech than mine." "Yes," said Elena. "I've had more practice being heard." Her hand stayed on his. That was the thing he kept returning to, in the years that followed, when people asked how it began. Not the speech, not the crossing of the hall, but the simple, unbearable fact of a hand that did not move away when the whole room willed it to. The protocol officer arrived first, naturally. He was a thin, gray Halcyon man named Theodore, whose entire body seemed to have been engineered for the purpose of disapproving quietly, and he materialized at the queen's shoulder, with a data slate clutched to his chest like a shield. "Radiance," he murmured, "the council requests, that is, they very strongly request, a word. The Drathi are threatening to leave. The Varen ambassador has used all 4 hands. All 4, Radiance. He has run out of hands." "Then he'll have to start using his head," said Elena, "which I'm told is a novel experience for him." William made a sound into his glass that he tried to pass off as a cough. Theodore's eye twitched. "Radiance, with respect, this is not a matter that humor will—" "Theodore," she said it gently, and the gentleness stopped him cold. "Sit down." "I beg your pardon?" "Sit. There's a chair. There are, in fact, a great many empty chairs at this end of the hall. I can't think why. The company is the best in the building. Sit down and I'll tell you exactly what to tell the council, and you'll find it's all quite survivable. Most things are. We just spend our lives standing up when we could be sitting. And the protocol officer, against every instinct of a long and decorated career, sat. He perched on the edge of the seat like a man expecting it to be confiscated, but he sat, and William watched something happen that he was fairly sure had never happened at any Unity banquet in Halcyon's history. The machinery of 9 worlds, bending, just slightly, just 1 chair's worth, around the far end of the table. What Elena told Theodore was this, that the banquet had been convened to bind 9 worlds together, and that she could think of no truer binding than a queen and a human eating dinner as equals where everyone could see. That favoritism was the wrong word. The right word was parity. That if the Drathi wished to leave over the sight of 2 people treating each other as people, they were welcome to explain that grievance aloud, in detail, to a galaxy that would find it very funny. And that the human delegation, long reduced to a single forgotten man in a drawer-bound form, was, as of this evening, formally reinstated, with its sole remaining attaché elevated to envoy, because a flag that survives 2 years of being unsaluted has demonstrated rather more loyalty than 9 worlds full of people with cologne. "Envoy," William repeated, when Theodore had hurried off with his instructions. "You can't just make me an envoy. There's surely a process, forms, a drawer somewhere." "I'm the queen," she said. "I am the process. It's the one genuinely useful feature of the job. Everything else is gowns. And here I was, 2 years a centerpiece, and all it took to get promoted was for the most powerful woman in 3 systems to develop questionable taste in dinner companions." "Excellent taste," she corrected. "I chose the only man in the room who'd been seasoned by adversity. The rest are still raw." He laughed, and this time it didn't startle anyone, because the hall had finally, grudgingly, returned to its 1,000 conversations. Though every one of them was now, he knew, about him, and he found he didn't mind. There was a difference he was learning between being looked through and being looked at, and it was roughly the difference between being a window and being a man. The chandeliers had drifted low enough now to gild the table in amber. Beyond the great curved window, the blue planet had turned its full face to them at last, vast and patient, and somewhere out in the dark, the little maintenance skiff blinked its way home. William looked at it, and then at the woman beside him, the impossible, radiant, improbable woman with the pointed ears and the hand that hadn't moved. And he understood that he had stopped, somewhere over the course of one dinner, talking to drones because no one else would listen. He had a much better listener now. He'd have to retire the drones. They'd understand. They always did. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now," said Elena, lifting her glass a final time, "the smallest toast in the history of toasts and the largest thing that had ever happened to him. You finish your dinner, and tomorrow we find out how many chairs the universe can move, once someone's finally brave enough to move the first one." He touched his glass to hers. The space between their chairs was gone entirely now. Had been, he realized, for some time. "To moving chairs," he said. "To being seen," said the Queen, and drank. Friends, we've reached the end of Elena and William's story. I hope you enjoyed it. Please don't forget to like the story, and feel free to share your thoughts in the comments, whether you loved or had criticisms of certain parts. Don't miss our next story, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. See you in the next story, friends. Goodbye.